Mr. Bailey's screen will show up. I'm seeing it now. Is everyone seeing it?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Over to you, Mr. Bailey.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I would like to extend thanks to the Negril Chamber of Commerce for accepting our request to meet and to deliver a brief presentation on the preparation of the new Negril and Green Island Area Development Order. Oh, sorry, let me say that differently. Preparation of the revised Negril and Green Island Area Development Order. I would like to tender apologies for our director, Mr. Leonard Francis, who is otherwise engaged, as well as the CEO, Mr. Peter Knight. But we have a very dedicated team that is here to share with you and to listen to your comments and feedbacks and suggestions so that we can prepare an all-encompassing revised Negril and Green Island Area Development Order. All right, so we have a brief presentation, just a brief outline of the presentation. So we will, for the benefit of board directors who wouldn't have been privy to a development order presentation, we will take you through what the development order is, to include the contents and the objectives, why we're doing a new development order for Negril. We will look at the methodology of preparation of the development order. We will look at the order area boundary and the local planning and special areas contained therein. We will look at who some of the stakeholders and partners are towards the preparation of the order. We will look at where we are and next steps. And we will look at some of the preliminary data that we've collected so far as it relates to existing land uses. And we will also discuss how the Negril Chamber of Commerce can assist towards the preparation. So what is a development order? So the development order is a legal document prepared under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1957 that is used to guide development in the area to which it applies. The development order area may constitute an entire parish or may only apply to a specific area, as is the case with Negril, which straddles both parishes of Hanover and Westmoreland. So this area was recognized as a development order area and is properly outfitted with its own local planning authority that has jurisdiction over development matters within the order area. In consultation with the Hanover and Westmoreland municipal corporations. The development order consists of land use zoning maps, policy statements, and standards relating to land use activities. It enables the local planning authority and/or the Town and Country Planning Authority to regulate development within the area defined as a development order area. It also informs citizens and developers on the location, scale, magnitude, and type of development to be undertaken within sections of the development order area. Contents of the development order, as prescribed by the Town and Country Planning Act of 1957, the development order looks at issues as it relates to roads, whether it be through the reservation of land for roads and the establishment of public rights of way, the closing or diversion of existing roads and public and private rights of way, construction of new roads and alteration of existing roads, etc. The development order also looks at buildings and other structures as it relates to regulating and controlling buildings and other structures as it relates to the size and the height of buildings, building line coverages, plot area ratios, plot coverages, etc., objects which may be affixed to buildings, whether it be advertisement, etc. The development order also looks at community planning through the provision of control of land by zoning for specific uses, as well as regulating the layout of housing areas, including density. It also looks at amenities as it relates to the reservation of lands for open spaces, whether public or private, identifying lands for cemeteries or crematorias, reservation of lands for communal parks, game and bird reserves, etc. The development order also looks at public services in terms of facilitating the establishment, extension, or improvement of works by other statutory bodies as it relates to power, lighting, water supply, sewage, drainage, solid waste disposal, etc. It also looks at transportation and communications in terms of facilitating the establishment or extension or improvement of systems of transportation, whether by land, water, or air. Also allocating sites for use in relation to transport and the reservation of land. It also looks at the environment and conservation, especially within the Negril and Green Island outer area, which is a very environmentally sensitive areas, owing to its many coastal wetland areas, to include the Great Morass, which is a big part of the outer area. The order also looks at other miscellaneous items as it relates to subdivision of land. It looks at the extension or reduction of boundaries, urban limits, etc. So again, the objectives, as I had mentioned earlier, one is to regulate development by enabling the planning authorities to regulate developments within the outer area. Two, to secure and coordinate, among other things, proper conditions and conveniences and the coordination of roads and public services in the outer area. To also protect and conserve amenities and to promote the sustainable development of the resources of the area, and to also inform citizens and developers alike on the location, scale, magnitude, and type of development to be undertaken within the outer area. So why a new development order? So some members will remember that the current Negril and Green Island area development order was made provisional in 2013 and confirmed in 2015. So we are almost 7 years down the line. So why a new development order? Well, since the confirmation of the development order in 2015, there have been several new planning concepts that have been, coming to the forefront. Things like, smart cities, walkable cities, compact cities, things of that sort. So the development order, this new and improved development order, will seek to look at areas within the outer area where we can promote these type of planning concepts, which would hopefully relate to sustainable development of the areas so identified in the outer area. There's also been new and changing vision of the citizens within the outer area. Persons, based on what is happening, persons will from time to time develop a new vision for the area as it might relate to different sectors or industries emerging that person might think might be suited or well suited for the area. There's also the growing demand for land, tying into the changing vision, the growing demand for land, where persons are seeking opportunities for development of new and emerging industries in several, not necessarily Negril as yet, but we have seen across the island the development of office spaces as it relates to business process outsourcing, more warehouse development in some areas. Not saying that this is the case in Negril, but it could be that at some point Negril would like to have some of these types of development to assist and to complement the nature and the character of what Negril is. There's also the issue of urban sprawl and illegal settlement development throughout the outer area. We have seen over the years where resort developments have been developed, and we have observed where persons in seek of employment opportunities would set up some type of development to eliminate the cost of transportation to work and home. And we've seen this on several occasions where it has spiraled out of control. So the development order will seek to address some of these issues through the proper allocation of lands to alleviate this issue. Also, there is the recently prepared new Negril master plan that was prepared by the agency on behalf of the cabinet. The cabinet had given an instruction for us to prepare a master plan for an area to be called New Negril, which is an area that extended from the parish border of Westmoreland and Hanover and extended northwards to just outside the township of Lucy. So this master plan was prepared. It is presently with our executive management undergoing reviews. There is also the ongoing IWECO project in Negril, which has tied to it several components to include a height and density study in Negril, and this the part of Negril that is covered by the Negril Environment Protected Area, the EPA, as well as looking at issues related to the re-wetting of some hydrological studies of the Great Morass, issues related to land survey and land tenure within the morass to identify issues of encroachment, etc. And again, also tied to the urban sprawl and illegal settlement development issue is also the influx of development in environmentally sensitive areas, to include areas of wetland, areas of agricultural significance, etc. So these are just some of the reasons why we deemed it necessary to prepare a new development order for Negril. And over the years, we have heard from from members of the Chamber of Commerce, as it relates to certain issues that has been affecting Negril over the years. And we want to improve the development order and the processes to allow for greater transparency and for greater understanding of the processes involved with respect to land use planning and development within the order area. In terms of the methodology for the preparation of the development orders, we undergo several processes, simultaneously towards preparing the development orders, which includes the gathering of data from all relevant agencies, departments, and organizations. We undertake several literature reviews. We establish guiding principles that are in keeping with the Sustainable Development Goals. We also do benchmarking of the guiding principles against several other international jurisdictions. We conduct stakeholder consultations, such as the one that we are having now with the Chamber of Commerce. We conduct a reconnaissance survey to look at the boundaries of the order area, as well as the areas identified as local planning areas or special areas that specific policies would be drafted for to better manage and regulate land use and development within those areas. We also conduct our land use survey within these areas and prepare our existing land use maps after data entry. We prepare existing land use maps, some of which I'll share with you in this presentation. We also plot committed lands for the order area. And these basically are lands that have been earmarked whether by cabinet or various statutory bodies for various uses, as well as lands that have been committed whether through approval by the local planning authority or the authority. We also prepare several statements, sectoral policies and objectives as it relates to the different thematic areas that the order looks at, as it relates to roads, transportation, housing, water supply, waste treatment and disposal, energy generation and conservation of the built and natural environment, etc. We also prepare land use proposal maps. So once we have assessed the existing land use, we look at the development trends, we look at the opportunities for growth within the areas. We prepare a land use proposal map, which is intended to guide development within the order area and the local planning areas for the next 5 to 10 years. Even though going forward, it is the intention of the agency to revise and update development orders, every 5 years. we have the compilation of the development order, and after that, the order becomes a draft development order. Then we move to stages of provisional development order, where the order is reviewed by the Chief Parliamentary Council and other stakeholders. And based on the advice or the advice of the authority, we then move to stages of provisional publication and towards confirmation. All right, so on screen, I'm sharing with you the development order area boundary. The development order area boundary remains the same as that which was contained in the existing or the current confirmed development order. The other area we have identified or we have retained the local planning areas. So in the confirmed order, we would have had the Negril local planning area. We would also have had the Orange Bay and Green Island local planning areas. In this reiteration of the Negril and Green Island area development order, we have looked at the Negril area, and we have seen where in the current order there are some areas that were outside of the local planning area and that were posing a challenge to the Negalpa as well as the authority in terms of what was happening within these areas. So there were sections of West End that were outside of Negril. So what we have sought to do in this iteration is that we have now included areas of West End, Old Hope, Broughton within what we now call the Greater Negril local planning area. Over the years, we have seen various subdivision applications within some of these areas. We have seen the establishment of more resort areas, but we are also very mindful of the environmental sensitivity towards that southern coast of Negril, and we want to pay special attention to how we develop those areas and to maintain some amount of order within that area. There's also the Orange Bay local planning area, which also saw the inclusion of 2 additional EDs, as well as the Green Island local planning area as well. These 2 local planning areas also would have formed a part of the new Negril boundary of the new Negril master plan that was prepared in 2019, 2020. So we would have already had some information as it relates to those areas, and we would have prepared some policies for those areas, which we would seek to incorporate within this new or this revised development order for Negril. There was also the inclusion of a special area, Marchtown, which we had also identified, some activities happening within that area, which we wanted to have greater control over. So the Marchtown area was designated as a special area, which we would be preparing specific zoning policies, zoning plans and policies for. And I should mention it here. We know that one of the key areas of interest, and I surmise to the Chamber of Commerce, would also be the stretch along the Norman Manley Boulevard. And this area, while not identified as a local planning area, it is an area which, in our overall order area map, will have specific zoning and policies as it relates to the use of land along the Norman Manley Boulevard. So just a brief look at some of the stakeholders who we have consulted and will continue to consult with throughout the process of preparing the development order. And these include the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Negalpa, Hanover and Westmoreland Municipal Corporations, the various ministries, departments, and agencies of government, to include the National Works Agency, National Water Commission, Mines and Geology, Water Resources Authority, etc. the Urban Development Corporation, which is a significant landowner within the order area, especially within the Rutland Point, Ireland Pen area. There's also the Social Development Commission, who we would look to in terms of mobilizing the various community groups and citizens associations, etc., to get the information out, and to also solicit their comments and feedback. Especially since, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have not been able to come out as we usually would and go into the communities to meet with the community members, we would be seeking the assistance of the SDC in having more virtual consultations with some of these groups, civic groups, etc. There's also the various non-governmental organizations, to include the Jamaica Environmental Trust, the Negril Environmental Protected Trust, etc. There's also the parish development committees, the NCC, the Negril Chamber of Commerce, the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, as well as the civil society, to include the churches, the schools, landowners, and the general public within our general citizenry of Negril. So where are we? And in terms of next steps, so again, the process would have commenced at the start of the financial year, which would have been April 1st, 2021. The schedule for the preparation of the order would have been the financial year 2021-2022. So that means that we are slated to have ready by the end of March 2022 a draft Negril and Green Island area development order. What we've done so far, and we have had to, with the onset of the COVID pandemic, several of our activities would have been impacted. Some activities would have been delayed, because of the restrictions that would have been applicable at the time. So we conducted our reconnaissance survey in May 2021. We would have conducted our land use and study area survey a bit later than we normally would. So we did that in around November to December 2021. Our land use data entry, based on when we had collected the data, is still ongoing. We would have completed the data entry for several areas, and I'll be able to show you some of the maps. Or stakeholder consultations, that is an ongoing process where even based on the COVID-19 pandemic, we have not been able to meet with some of our stakeholders, as I mentioned, as we normally would, but we still write and we still follow up and try as best as possible to have those stakeholder consultations. We would have received some information from some of our partners, to include the ministries, departments, agencies of government, as it relates to their plans and proposals for the Negril and Green Island area. We would have concluded several sectoral policy and objectives preparation in November 2021. The preparation of our land use, zoning, and density maps are ongoing. Our local area plan preparation would have been completed in January 2022. And as I mentioned, we're looking to compile our complete compilation of the draft Negril and Green Island area development order between end of February to March 2022. So that is where we are in terms of the process. So we will now have a preliminary look at some of the existing land use data that was collected up to December 2021. So again, so this is a look at the Greater Negril existing land use map. And we would see, this basically gives us a pictorial representation of the land uses as they are occurring on ground within the Greater Negril area. To include, our browns. You're seeing our browns, which represent our residential areas. The yellows represent resort areas or resort land uses. The majority of the area you would see is covered by the white and green patch, which are areas of dense vegetation, shrub woodlands. We're seeing green, some agricultural lands in the mix, or blues represent, or dark blues represent our commercial areas or commercial entities. etc. Now, the idea of preparing the zoning maps, we will now look at the trends of development. We will look at the projected population growth within these areas to determine the allocation of land uses for the area. With respect to Orange Bay, this is the Orange Bay existing land use map, similarly indicating the uses as they exist on ground up to December 2021. Again, we're seeing the area, a good portion of the area being dominated by dense vegetation. We're seeing a part of the Great Morass to the left side of the screen by Ireland Pen, Rutland Point area there. We're also seeing, a couple large tracts of agricultural lands. We're seeing significant residential areas, etc., and some interspersed commercial uses. Similarly for Green Island, Green Island, again, we're seeing, some dense vegetation, shrub woodland. We're seeing some significant vacant lots represented by the gray. We're seeing some residential areas, some wetland areas as well, as identified by the, if you can see my cursor, these are some wetland areas, so we're seeing, so we are getting a view and seeing what exactly is happening on ground. And again, as I said, based on various population projections, committed lands, etc., we will, seek to prepare the land use zoning map or zoning proposals going forward. And again, the Marchtown special area, which was included. So we're seeing significant areas of vegetation as well as significant areas of residential areas. The Marchtown area, whilst we have seen, an uptick in development activities within this area, based on some work being done by our sister branch within the agency, the National Spatial Strategy Branch, they have identified some concerns regarding the Marchtown special area, where they would have prepared, and they recently presented to the Hanover Municipal Corporation a presentation on the settlement delineation of some communities within Hanover. And Marchtown was one such area that they had identified where significant activities were taking place. However, they had made some recommendations to somewhat limit the type and the spread of development activities within that area to allow for the Orange Bay, because based on its proximity to Orange Bay, it is just east of the Orange Bay local planning area. And the intention, of the spatial strategy branch, who are, somewhat the architects of the national spatial plan, is to allow for the Orange Bay local planning area to be properly developed. So one of the recommendations coming out of that study, that delineation study, is to restrict large-scale housing developments within the Marchtown area and to allow for those developments to take place within the Orange Bay local planning area, where there's projected to be greater access to services, etc. So again, so we're seeing, what the Marchtown area looks like. Presently, it is very linear in pattern. Most of the developments, are occurring along the main road and just a little off the main road. We're seeing areas of significant vegetation, which based on, some preliminary assessment of the area that we would seek to protect, etc. So you may be asking, what is the role of the Negril Chamber of Commerce, with respect to the preparation of the development order? Well, we view the Negril Chamber of Commerce as a very influential, group within the order area. Again, several members would be, owners and operators of properties, and various businesses within the outer area, and we think that the Negril Chamber of Commerce would be able to provide us with valuable information, as it relates to, the proper development of the area. They will be able to assist us in identifying some of the needs, some of the critical needs within the area, as well as, projecting, looking forward, the type of, businesses and industries, that could be, suited, that are not already existing in Negril, that could be suited for development within Negril. So, the Chamber of Commerce can provide us, on information as it relates from their standpoint, on business acumen as it relates to land use and environmental issues occurring within the outer area. Again, new information on new and emerging industries to possibly be sited within the outer area. Areas that are maybe flooded whenever it rains. Water sources, whether it be water sources, on your property, or that of that could, would complement or add to the, the water supply of the area. Suitable sites for commerce and industry, resort development, recreational development, housing, etc. Areas that are, have some historical significance or archaeological significance that the Chamber of Commerce think could be, added to the list of declared historic sites and buildings within the outer area. Information as it relates to drainage pattern in different parts of the outer area, areas that are maybe prone to land slippages, and any other pertinent information that the Chamber of Commerce possesses that, that they think, could assist us in properly formulating the policies and objectives and zoning proposals for the outer area. And that ends the formal presentation. We can move into some discussion, some comments and feedback and suggestion from the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, very much for that excellent and very useful presentation. I see Randy Watson has his hand up. Oh, maybe not. Okay, over to you, Richard.
All right. Thanks, Nola.
Where are you breaking up?
Very informative.
You're breaking up.
I realize that you're at the final stages of preparing the draft, right? You said it should be ready by the end of this month or to next month.
March.
Yeah, between the end of February and to the end of March.
So, so I suppose the input that is required by us is urgent.
Yes, I would believe so.
Okay, Mr. Salmon has his hand up. We will take Mr. Salmon now. Go ahead, Damien.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, for that very informative presentation. I just wanted, as far as say information about things like areas of potential flooding and things like that. Clearly, you must have already, given where you are in this process, identified the Norman Manley Boulevard as just a nightmare as far as flooding goes. A lack of drainage off the boulevard at certain specific parts, if not at all, including downtown, the roundabout, that pretty much most of the major roads in Negril have really very little or no provision for drainage that was never properly installed and never or started to be installed but never finished. And so I presume that that you're aware of all of these locations on the highway and in the area. Is that right?
Yes, yes, Mr. Salmon. Yes. So historically, we would have had those information for those areas. We would have written to the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, for updated information, especially in some of the areas, that weren't necessarily identified as local planning areas. And then, sometimes over time, areas that, wouldn't necessarily normally flood. Over time, we would have seen instances where some areas flood or some areas might flood occasionally, or seasonally, etc. So if we, so we just want to reconcile, the information that we have, also with the information, that, persons within the chambers, whether it be where you operate businesses or, or maybe areas where you live and traverse, where you may have identified potential sites that may flood, or instances where, the issue might have been caused or exacerbated by, improper waste disposal, block drains, etc. So we're asking for that kind of information. So yes, we're familiar with the popular ones, or the usual ones, but in instances where some of the flooding is localized to areas that are not necessarily local planning areas, or that are not frequently traversed by by members of the team, we would ask for that type of assistance in providing that information.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I also wanted to ask you how the role of Nagalpa in the giving of permits that NEPA for building. How important do you see the role of Nagalpa in all of that?
Yes, the Negalpa has a very important role. As mentioned, they are, one of our key partners. They are the local planning authority with primary jurisdiction over the Negril and Green Island order area, in terms of reviewing development applications as they come in. So they have a very important and critical role, and we rely heavily on them to provide us with information as to what is happening on the ground. And the development order, when prepared, it is what Negalpa will use to enforce their decisions as it relates to development applications, as it relates to the use of lands within the order area. So they have a very important role in the process, and they are one of our key partners and stakeholders that we regularly consult with and provide updates to. As well as they provide input and help in identifying some of the gaps and issues as end users of the development order, so that we can continue to improve and refine the preparation process and ultimately the end product, which is the development order itself.
Thank you.
That's it. You're done. Damian, that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have Sophie, then Pansy, and then Elaine. Go ahead, Sophie. Go ahead, Sophie.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It really was very good. I have a few comments and I have a few questions. The comments we will obviously put in our what we send to you, but right now, I'm a little bit disappointed that you say this is only for 5 years, because these plans, shouldn't they be kind of visionary, like 20 to 50 years? Because, how are you going to decide what size sewage system? I mean, the sewage system we have now was actually obsolete when it was completed, because it, took a while to get the funding and they put it in and so forth, and Negril grew very fast during that period of time. So when you say 5 years, I really feel that, when it comes to things like the sewage and so forth, it should be more visionary. We should be looking at a 20 to 50 year future. That's one of the things I wanted to say. aesthetics, I really think each Nagalpa and the municipal corporations should have an architect on all of them. I'm not saying we should tell people what they can design and build, but I'm saying that there should be a minimum of the sort of aesthetics that are built, because Jamaica has some really ugly buildings. And for such a beautiful country, I think we could do a lot better. So I think, maybe advice from architects on it saying, there's nothing wrong with your plan, but we suggest you X, Y, Z to make it look more in tune with the town or the area that they're putting in. I think that's something that should be really done. I noticed there wasn't really anything much said about climate change. I'm talking about, rain harvesting and so on and so forth. And also I'm very concerned about the format. Now, I would say I'm a fairly intelligent person, and the format of the last one was very, very difficult to read. And we still had stuff in there that, really are no longer necessary, like how high you could put an aerial for your TV and that sort of thing, which I think are kind of obsolete by now. But really the format, if we can change the format, if we could have it online. And now I'm coming to the questions. Will we be able to see it before it's totally finalized? Will we be able to see a draft of this new development order? That's question one. Question two, will there be a town plan of Negril, what Negril will look like in 20 years from now? Like, for example, where the courthouse will be, where the school will be, because by then we should have a high school in Negril. Will there be a town plan of what Negril will look like in 20 years from now? That's one, that's question two. And question three, how will the development order, the Green Island Area Planning Development Order, affect the sections that include, I hate to say it, but your new Negril thing? So those are basically 4 questions. I'd really like to get some feedback from you on, please.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Grizzle Romel. Yes, you've raised some very important points. As it relates to the timeline with the development orders, when I said 5 years, it is really just for the revision and update of the development order. So when the development order is prepared, it is usually projected to last, within the medium to long term, which is about, between, 15 to 20 years. So those are factored in the zoning proposals, etc. The 5 years comes about as it relates to updating the order. So as I had mentioned at the start of the presentation, and I would have given reasons for the preparation of this new development order, when we had confirmed the existing one in 2015, it would have been the same, development of new planning concepts, to include, and forgive me, but, as part of those planning concepts, issues related to climate change, rainwater harvesting, the use of renewable energy sources, the whole smart cities, smart growth concepts, those things are included on the new planning concepts. So this was one of the main reasons why this new development order was needed, because we have seen where from that time, where some of these things were, they were being talked about, but they weren't being actively implemented. But now, we are seeing where these things are starting to be implemented. Even just over the last couple of years, we have seen how drastically the world has changed with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Persons being working from home, doing school from home. So and what it showed was that it identified, some major deficiency in our infrastructure provisions as it relates to internet services, access to internet, etc. So the order, while it looks, from the medium to long term, it does some element of medium to long term planning, over a period of 10 to 15 to 20 years. Ideally, what we want to do going forward is that every 5 years we want to check in to ensure that the policies are still relevant, and where policies are, not relevant or needs to be updated or amended to, suit the reality of the times. It is our intention to do that, For example, and one that sticks out to me, and we are seeing it, we are seeing it playing out in areas like Kingston and St. Andrew and some of the more urbanized areas, as it relates to parking. And as I mentioned, with everything that is happening with the COVID-19 pandemic and the world and the country moving toward more flexi work arrangements and things like that, the order might have a specific policy that speaks to, if you're doing an office development, you're required to have this amount of parking. But if we're moving to a situation where we have more flexi work arrangements, where the office buildings might not be 100% occupied, you might find you might find situations where the parking is in excess, in some areas the parking generally tends to be asphalted area, which increases surface runoff and things like that. So you wouldn't want the order to be too rigid, where you can't allow for flexibility. So you don't want the order to it plans for the 20 years, but then you don't look at it for 20 years, and that is the fate that we had suffered with the previous orders. You'd have had orders from as far back as the 60s that weren't really updated until the 2013 and the 2015. Before the 2015 Negril order, the previous one I think was about 1970 something. So you don't want that long gap in terms of updating the order. But definitely I agree, the order does plan for medium to long term, but we want built into the system where we update it, or we look at it every 5 years. If we see things that need to be revised, amended, updated, excluded, we want to be able to do that, so that at all times we have a very current, development order process with relevant policies and guidelines that can assist in achieving the sustainable development that we all want for the area. So that is with regards to that point. As it relates to the need for architect, yes, I agree with you. Even we at NEPA, we would have engaged the services of an architect planner as far back as I think it was 2015, where we would have requested from the Ministry of Finance the establishment of a position within NEPA for an architect planner to assist us in reviewing development applications from the perspective of the similar aesthetics, especially within the corporate area of Kingston and St. Andrew, where over the years there has been an increased level of activity within the construction industry, especially as it relates to multifamily developments, high-rise apartments, etc. We thought it necessary that we have an architect planner to assist us with formulating streetscape studies, so that we can have some idea as to how these areas will look when fully built out at the densities, the allowable densities within those areas. And I agree, similarly, within the Negril municipal corporations, I think they too can benefit from having, an architect on their team to assist with the preparation of streetscape studies, various aesthetic studies to determine what the area could and should look like using the policies, etc. And also, it is also a test of the policies. So when we indicate a policy as it relates to setback, height of building, etc. Yes, you read it, but sometimes to visualize it, you can readily visualize it, and an architect can assist in bringing those 2D, those 2D plans, the text that we have in the order to life by representing it, in a 3D or a graphic thing. So I agree with you on that point. As it relates to the climate change, yes, so I said, forgive me. So the climate change, rainwater harvesting, these would have been some of the new planning concepts and some of the new planning considerations that would have gone into, our review of this new development order and why we would need it. So basically, and remember, prior to the renaming of our ministry, we would have been as an agency under the Ministry of Environment, Land, Water, Climate Change. So that was definitely a key part, a key thing in the preparation of our development orders since 2015. So I think the current Negril order, it probably wouldn't have mentioned in any great detail climate change, but definitely this new one will look at climate change in a more focused and in-depth method. Given the situation, the location of Negril, at the western tip of the island, exposed to the coastal elements, possible sea level rise. We have seen over the years the issue as it relates to erosion, within the area. So definitely we intend to look at that and to put in the proper policies and things that can, going forward, mitigate or alleviate some of the issues being experienced within the grill. With respect to the format of the development order, this is something that, even us at NEPA, we have tried over the years to see how best we can change the format of the development order. We would have met with several stakeholders to include the Chief Parliamentary Council within the Ministry of Justice as it relates to the preparation of legal documents. And we would have gotten some preliminary guidance as to, how we should prepare the development orders. And I think based on the format that the Jamaica Printing Service uses in preparing, documents such as these legal documents, we were advised that the format that they are being prepared in is what is the capability of that service. So we thought, or we decided, that we wouldn't have changed the format based on the legal requirements of the Act in terms of how the order should be prepared. But what we have been looking at, is developing, similar to what was done for Vision 2030, seeing how we can prepare a more user-friendly, order, or like what would you call it? Something like a simplified version. A simplified version where you can go in, you can look at the zoning map, you can see what are the applicable policies to those areas, what are some of the planning parameters, etc. Without having to go through all the legal jargons and technicalities and all of that. But notwithstanding though,
And if we could have like an online version that was interactive, it would be great.
Yes. So that is something as well. That is something as well that, since I have, started working at NEPA, that is something that has been in train. And I think come next financial year, I know that there will be some significant work done on creating an information system that ties in all the land use maps, land use zoning maps that we've prepared for the entire island through the various development orders, to make it interactive. I think ultimately the end game is for persons to be able to go online and to click on any lot within the island. And when they bring up that information, it tells you what the zoning is, what are the applicable planning parameters, etc. So that persons, can know exactly what can be done on a particular piece of land, etc. But it requires, a lot of, I don't want to say capital expenditure, but to this date, we haven't had it because of certain, capital, expenditure issues in getting the system up. But it is the intention of the agency on a whole to get to that point where, our development orders will be interactive. Persons will be able to view them online. And this is also tied into even with the whole architect planner thing. Where streetscapes and streetscape studies will be done for selected areas, where you'll be able to click on the lot, pull it up, you can see what can, you can get a vision of what can be designed on the lot, and you can look at a particular street and see, that street developed at all the allowable planning parameters, what it could look like, but it is a work in progress, and I agree that we need to get there. We need to get there as quickly as possible. So that we can, everybody can have be on the same page in terms of how we want the area to be developed. And as it relates to, you just mentioned something about the aerial for TVs and height, things that you think are no longer necessary. I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're not necessary, but the order also makes provision for other statutory bodies and agencies with various responsibilities. So the order speaks to, as it relates to development in and around airports or airport facilities, It speaks to development, within, areas of a certain agricultural land capability or certain geology or certain slope size and thing. And these development applications, they are generally forwarded to the bodies with the various responsibilities for their comments, their technical comments, in order to assist in making a final recommendation. So as it relates to the antennas for TVs, etc. And I mean, I don't want to single out the TV. I mean, I understand what you mean when you say that. But, depending on, for example, you could have a broadcasting station that requires to have a mast or a tower on their building to be able to, send out a signal. But the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority might be interested in knowing, the height of this, and how it will be, laid out to, to see how it will affect, if any at all, if it will affect, their operations. So there are some things that, still have some relevance and still have some place within the order. But I agree, we will look at, to see the ones definitely that are, not required, and see how best we can address those. Moving to your questions, Mrs. Grizzly had a lot of points. But as we move to your questions, when will you be able to see the document when it's finalized? Or will you be able to see the document when it's before it's finalized? Well, I would have directed this question to Mrs. Frankson, the acting manager, but I don't see her online. But generally, we tend to share what we can once we're given the instruction and the directive from the director or the CEO. We would freely share the draft with you, for you to provide your comments and feedback, and to also see where any information that you would have provided to us, if it would have been included. And usually, if you provide us with information, we would generally tend to want to meet with you to go over, to explain, if we accept our recommendations that might not be accepted. We would generally want to have that type of a discussion where, we explain and we come to some consensus as it relates to, what is included in the order. So don't hold me to it, but I think we should be able to share, but I will confirm that with my various supervisors, and revert. As it relates to, will there be a town plan for Negril, looking at 20 years? Yes. So as I had mentioned, under the IWECA project, there is presently an ongoing Negril height and density study, similar to what was done for New Negril, where we had looked at, the possibility or the potential for, increases in building heights and parameters within that area. There was similarly supposed to be a similar plan done under the IWECA project as it relates to Negril height and density within the area south of the parish border, which is within the EPA, the Environmental Protected Area. So the consultants are expected to look at, especially the town area of Negril, to identify opportunities for, increased development within that area. They should be looking at the, suitable heights, plot area ratios and uses within that area. And as soon as they are, they have completed that process, we will review and look and see how best we can incorporate them within the development order.
I was really thinking more of like the civic town center, like, okay, we have the police station already, but like where the plan is for the school to go, or the plan where the courthouse will be one day, so that we as the citizens have an idea that, okay, this set of piece of land will one day be X and this set will be that. So I was more looking at the civic side of the plan, not so much the development side, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I understand. Yes, so some element of that will be done in our process of preparing the zoning plan for Negril. So we work closely with our, as I said, our sister branch, the Spatial Strategy branch, who are, some of the architects of the National Spatial Plan. And through their processes, they would have identified, areas, well, maybe not the specific areas, but generally at a regional level, suitable sites for the establishment of these type of services: schools, police stations, fire stations, health centers, post offices or postal agencies, etc. So once we look at what their proposals are in terms of for that region, for that region, then from a local area perspective, which is what we do in the order, we bring it down to a local area level. So then we will go in and we'll try to identify the lands with the assistance of the Negril and Green Island local planning authority, identify suitable lands for the establishment of these. And just to add, through the National Spatial Strategy Branch, their processes in determining some of these recommendations, they would have conducted several growth center surveys within the area. So what they would look at is that they would look at, as it relates to various existing services, they would look at issues relating to drive time. They would look at catchment areas, so how far persons come from to access the services that they're accessing. They will look at also the projected population growth, over a period of 15 to 20 years. And based on that, they would make recommendation that, a particular health center should probably be upgraded, or based on the level of service, another one might be needed somewhere else to serve another catchment area, etc. So based on those studies, we will look at that, and that will assist us in zoning the lands within the town center, or as you said, the civic center. As it relates to how will the development order affect sectors that include sections that include the new Negril. So there is an overlap. So the new Negril area would have definitely overlapped with a section of the Negril order area. So in terms of how will the development order affect that? Well, seeing that we are the authors of both documents, we would be mindful to incorporate elements of or some of the proposals that would have been included in the new Negril master plan within the development order. So as I had mentioned earlier, that document is, I believe, still with our executive management, or executive and senior management within the agency for review. When they are finished with their review, if they have any recommendations or changes, we will assess them and make those changes and resubmit to them. And from then I assume or I surmise that they will then forward to the cabinet for their review and decision on that. And I suppose where cabinet approves the master plan, then the policies that would have been pulled from that master plan and included in the order, will remain. But the intention is to have some synergy between some of the recommendations that were proposed in the new Negril master plan to be included in the development order, to allow for synergy based on the direction of cabinet and or stakeholders who we would have consulted with during the preparation of that master plan. So I hope that answers your questions, and I hope I have satisfactorily addressed the points that you have made, Mrs. Grizzle-Romel.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think you've been very in-depth. The only one request now is that the new Negril gets changed to another name. You guys need to find another name.
Yes. So remember, when you were a part of the reviewing committee, we would have made recommendations in the master plan itself, which was submitted to the executive management and senior management, that based on consultation with several stakeholders, the name was an issue, and that we would have recommended that, where possible, there be a revisit of the name designation of the area. So that is definitely taken into consideration, Mrs. Grizzle-Romel.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie and Mr. Bailey. Before we go to Pansy, can you, since it's being mentioned, can you, Mr. Bailey, just for the benefit of those who are not quite clear, what is the difference between the new Negril order, quote unquote, that was discussed a couple of years back, and this order, this development order that you are getting information for now? Or are they the same and one same thing?
Oh, yeah, so no. So the new Negril, that it was a master plan that was prepared and not a development order. So that is why, if you notice, when I was presenting and I was tempted to say new Negril development order, and I revert to revised Negril development order. So they're two different things. So as I had mentioned, the development order is a legal document that guides development within the area to which it applies. So it is what the NIGALPA and the authority, the Town and Country Planning Authority, uses in assessing development applications within the order area. The master plan was a document that was prepared on the authority of the cabinet, as they had sought to investigate the possibility or the potential of increasing building heights and densities within an area that they had designated as New Negril, which incorporated the area north of the parish border of Hanover and Westmoreland and extended northwards towards outside the township of Lucy. So the master plan was essentially a conceptual document that looked at the possibility of increasing building heights and densities. Several ministries, departments, and agencies would have provided information, and our internal divisions and branches, to include the Environmental Management and Conservation Division, would have looked at the sensitive wetland areas, and they would have ranked them, ranging from low to high priority conservation wetland areas, coastal wetland areas. They would have identified areas that were already impacted by development, and areas that have not been impacted and should be protected. So they would have provided us with that level of information, and then we would then have looked at areas that were suitable for some level of development, and based on some projection from the Ministry of Tourism in terms of tourist markets that were being for want of a better word, eyed, in terms of introducing them to the tourist destination of Negril and Jamaica. We would have did some preliminary calculations and identify the amount of rooms that could be accommodated. We would have also looked at the associating needs for housing solutions, educational institutions, social amenities, etc. So
what is the status of that master plan, sir? Where is it now? Is it?
Yeah.
Can we? And will we see a draft?
Yeah. So as I indicated, the last update, to my knowledge, that I have was that it was circulated to our executive management and senior management within NEPA for their review and comments and feedback. I can follow up with my relevant supervisors to get an update on where they are with their review. But that was the last update that I have, that it was with the executive and senior management for review. And and based on any comments, feedback, suggestion that they would have, then we would look back at it and make the necessary changes. And I recall as well that yourself and several members were also part of a if it was a technical advisory committee or some type of advisory committee, that were able to participate in the process. So I would assume that when that is done and any revisions are to be made, that there will be some reconvening of that committee to look at and to whether it be accept or suggest further recommendations, I would think so, but I will do the necessary investigations and revert to the to the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, sir. Over to you, Pansy, for your question or
Oh.
comments.
Almost forgot what I was going to ask. Okay. You mentioned in your opening remarks about flooding, lighting, illegal squatting. What do you do with those results once you get them? Because, you know, we've been having flooding in Negril for the longest while. We've been having squatting in Negril for the longest while, no changes. Lighting has been an issue in Negril for the longest time. So how does this order now, or this revised order, what is it going to do as far as these topics?
Yes. So so within the process and within our land use data collection, we would have identified several, and the term that we use nowadays is unplanned settlements. So there would have been some settlements that wouldn't have gone through the development approval process, and we refer to them as unplanned settlements. In terms of how to treat with them, so as I had mentioned, there are various sectoral agencies, ministries, departments with varying responsibilities. And what we tend to do is that, in our consultative process, where we engage with these relevant, authorities, we indicate to them, the issues that we have identified as it relates to these things, for them to act on. But going forward, in terms of what the order does, is that the order will look and see what are some of the contributing factors from a land use, perspective, and make the necessary allocations for uses. So based on population projection and population growth over a period of time, we would recognize that additional housing areas might be needed. So we allocate or we zone lands for those uses, with the hopes that private developers and our housing developers, whether it be the HAJ or NHT, to identify these lands where they can add additional housing solutions from varying income levels, low to high, so that persons will have an opportunity or should have an opportunity to own homes within reasonable areas, and the conditions and standards of living are up to a level that is acceptable. As I mentioned, we see in some instances where persons migrate for employment, whether it be the development of a housing scheme or development of a resort. You find persons migrating for work, and establishing housing solutions on lands that aren't necessarily ideal, or have not gone through the formal development of approval process. So you end up with situations of improper sewage treatment and waste disposal. You have issues of improper infrastructure developments, improper utilities as it relates to light and water, etc. But we generally tend to bring these to their attention, and some of the agencies and departments are aware of some of the challenges as it relates to that. But going forward, we hope that through different different means of intervention, that we will be able to to address some of these issues in a very holistic and sustainable way.
Because since your last provision to 2015, we've had these same issues. So it's been 7 years and nothing has happened. So how long is it going to take for this new order to be in place where action is going to be done?
Yes. So in terms of the timeline, I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact timeline. We know that we are working to have the draft, ready by, end of February, March 2022. And I suspect that even after we have it in draft and going through various rounds of consultations with the stakeholders, there might be several revisions of certain policies, zonings, etc. But it is the intention and it is hoped that, as quickly as possible as we're able to move through those processes, that we will, seek to move to having the order made provisional and confirmed.
And then once it's confirmed, do you go to the relevant agencies to act, or do they just have the order sit there and collect dust?
So the order generally outlines requirements of the various agencies. So especially in areas that where we might have increased our allocation of lands for housing, it would indicate to the relevant ministries, departments, agencies what is required in terms of infrastructural development, whether it be new roads, widening of roads, introduction of drainage features, etc. In terms of getting things done, we at NEPA, we have several committees that review development applications, where several of these agencies they also sit, and sometimes when issues arise in these forums, where they might indicate that they're not able to provide or etc. We usually indicate to them where the order would have made provisions or would have made requirements of them to have certain things implemented because of what we would have assessed in our development trend patterns. We would have known what was coming, or what is to come over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So generally generally they shouldn't be caught off guard. So the development order is also a tool for them to assist in their planning, their infrastructural planning. So if they know that within an area we have allocated additional X amount of land for housing, or we have increased densities in areas, it is a tool for them to assist in planning so that they can say, all right, so this area is slated to receive an additional for argument's sake, 200 acres of housing. In order to satisfy that, we would need to be able to provide X amount of water or X kilowatts of energy to that area, etc. And they would have to look at the routes as to how to get the infrastructure there and how to maintain and etc. So it's also a tool for them in terms of planning, and especially seeing that they also collect for the services. They're able to project certain revenues, etc. So the development order, we hope that it is used by them as it relates to their development planning as well.
Hope so, because these issues are going on for years. 30 years ago, we still have those same issues. So each time you revise the order, it's the same thing that we keep revising and nothing is getting done.
Yes.
Thank you.
And just to add as well, Mrs. Racing, that when this order is promulgated, the NEGALPA, this is we call it the Bible, but this is what the NEGALPA would need to use to hold to task some of these agencies. Because as I said, we write the policies in to say that within this area where additional lands have been added for housing, these are the infrastructure requirements for these areas. So it is really the task of the NEGALPA to hold the relevant ministries, agencies, departments to task to have these things implemented, so that they are able to review the development applications and come to decisions, knowing that certain requirements have or will be satisfied to accommodate whatever it is that they're reviewing and subsequently approving, etc.
So will there be something in the order to state that persons cannot bypass NEGALPA and go to Kingston to get approval for certain things?
I'm not necessarily aware of that, but as it is the order.
No, this is Negril, it happens.
Yes, that was my point. That was what.
Okay,
well, so I'll let Elaine take over now.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, you can go ahead. Thanks, Pansy.
Thanks, President Richard. Yes, that's the point I wanted to bring, because you said in your speech that, and it was very good, by the way, that NEGALPA plays a key part Now, Pansy has just raised the issue that previously Nagalpa is bypassed. Even if the things go to Nagalpa, they go to Kingston. If Nagalpa is refused, they go to Kingston and they get passed. Now we're saying that in this new order, will that still happen? Because you have said Nagalpa plays a key role. And does that mean that Nagalpa will have more teeth or more clout? That's what we want to know futuristically, because they have none now.
I mean, to be fair to Negril, I wouldn't say that they don't have any teeth, but they are, they are restricted to operate within the confines of what is in the development order. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that they are bypassed, but with respect to certain type of applications, definitely for certain, certain applications are made at NEPA. When you talk of environmental permit applications, environmental license, beach licenses, etc., those applications are made at NEPA and not at Negril. The applications that are made at Negril are the planning and building applications. In some instances, based on the size of the development, you might find where the planning and building is submitted at Negril and the environmental permit application is submitted at NEPA. And then what would happen is that Negril is aware of the developments that require environmental permit applications. So whether it be a commercial space of a certain size, or or a residential subdivision over a certain number of lots, etc. Negril is well aware of the applications that require associated environmental permit applications. And Negril cannot issue any approvals for planning or building before an environmental permit application has been determined. And that is determined by the Natural Resources Conservation Authority at NEPA. So in some instances, you might have, some of those issues. And I agree, in the past, sometimes there has been some miscommunication in terms of, what has been submitted and where it has been submitted, and the development order would seek to, it is in the current one, it is in the current existing development order, the type of application that you would submit at Negril, and the responsibilities of Negril, to submit, submit or to forward applications to the Town and Country Planning Authority for certain decisions. And this was one of the reasons why NEPA was set up in the first place, to merge the decisions of the Town and Country Planning Authority as well as the Natural Resources Conservation Authority. Because prior, they sat as two different, well, they still sit as two different entities, but the agency itself assesses development applications from both a planning perspective, a development planning perspective, as well as an environmental perspective. And we are cognizant of the need to balance, development with environmental stewardship and conservation. So in some instances, you might have applications that are forwarded to NEPA, to the Town and Country Planning Authority, and based on information that, they might have, they might take a decision that might be, I don't want to say contrary, because remember, the Negril can only give approval to what is in the development order. So for example, if a particular lot is zoned for resort use, and a development application comes in for a commercial use, this will now be considered a deviation from the zoning, and by right, the Negril is required by law to forward that development application to the Town and Country Planning Authority for determination. So when that comes to the authority, based on information that they might have, might make a decision to support the commercial, approval of the commercial use with the associated environmental permit. So it would appear, to somebody that the decision was taken contrary to what the Negril would have recommended. But I just want to remind the commerce and persons that Negril can only operate within what is in the development order. They cannot take decisions contrary to what is in the development order. So sometimes, so it might appear, but in most instances, it is not a case of them being bypassed or overruled, etc. But Negril was set up, based on what was happening in Negril. They were set up to basically, control development, and that is what they do: development control. So they control development within the area as dictated by the development order. But as I had mentioned in the presentation, and it will be a recurring theme, where as we move forward, where there are several planning concepts and real-time issues that we have to deal with. And as I had mentioned, over the last 2 years, we have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has identified the need for certain type of development planning, whether it be we have seen where in some instances, some areas which have not had provision of open space, etc. We realize that we need to be very focused in terms of the provision of open space, as it relates to persons' mental health and being able to go out and socialize and breathe, responsibly, of course. But these are some of the things that as planners we have to look at and we have to balance, because the pillars, if you remember the 4 pillars of sustainable development, we look at the physical environment, we look at the natural environment, we look at the social and economic, and we try to balance those four pillars when it comes to development and land use planning.
Thank you.
Right,
Just one little information. I know you said about areas that may flood, etc., etc. There's an area out at Numperl Road by the gas station. They're the second one going out of town. That major flooding occurs there from time to time because of the water coming down from Mount Airy. So you said we could inform you about that. That's one bit.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right, I'd just like to reiterate the
Thank you.
point that Elaine raised about, and to provide some clarification based on how I understand it. As Mr. Bailey said, the NEGALPA is limited by the development order. Once the development order has become ratified or becomes a legal document, but it's not just NEGALPA, is it, Mr. Bailey? Doesn't NEPA have to abide by the development order as well, and all the other agencies? They can't deviate from the development order without, is that the case?
Who said that?
Yes. So you're correct, Mr. Wallace, in that the technical arm of NEPA also has to abide by the development order.
So what happens in a lot of cases is that if a development is submitted and it is discovered by NEGALPA that it is outside the development order, or if it's in breach of the development order, then NEGALPA cannot approve it or recommend it for approval. And neither can NEPA or Town and Country. What happens in the case is that the developer or the person submitting the document has to appeal to the minister. And then the minister, I believe, has the power to grant approval or not based on his his decision or whatever. Is that correct, Mr. Bailey?
Not entirely. So just to shed a little bit more clarity. So yes. So as I said, the technical officers who are preparing the various submissions, they too would have to abide by the provisions of the development order. However, the Town and Country Planning Authority, based on the Town and Country Planning Act, they have the authority to make deviations from the order.
Okay, so they can do it as well as the minister. Okay.
Yeah. So what you find happening is that when the development the applications are forwarded, where it deviates from the order, it is presented to the authority that this is a deviation from the order. However, the authority from time to time will ask for the technical opinion of the agency as it relates to certain development applications and as to whether or not they can be supported, but it is the authority that will take a decision to deviate from.
This is the board of directors
order.
of the authority.
Yes, the authority members, the board members of the authority.
So, quick question, does NRCA not also have a right to do that as well? Because I've seen NRCA override NEPA, isn't that correct?
Exactly. So if you remember, so there are two different authorities. So there's a Natural Resources Conservation Authority, and they operate within the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act. And there's a Town and Country Planning Authority, which operates within the Town and Country Planning Act. So with respect to environmental permit applications, beach licenses, environmental licenses, etc., that is within the purview of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority. And there is a special clause within their act which binds the crown, and there are certain provisions in there as well that restricts the granting of any planning or building permission before an environmental permit is granted. So with respect, so as I said, so there are some developments that require environmental permit, and I would have indicated, some of them may be based on the size or the type of development that requires an environmental permit. So in a case where an environmental permit is required, can grant an approval before the NRCA grants an approval for the environmental permit.
Okay, so it's clearer to me now. I thought it had to go to the minister, but apparently it doesn't.
And then that is the next step. So yeah, and then that is the next step, Mr. Wallace, where an application is refused by the authorities, then the applicant, based on the provisions within the Town and Country Planning Act, can appeal to the minister, and the minister can take a decision contrary to the authority as well.
So question, why would the, say for example, somebody's gonna do a development and everybody disagrees with it and it's an appeal goes to the minister. Shouldn't that information be divulged to the community? Because shouldn't the community have a say in whether the minister changes it? Should the minister have to listen then? Sorry, should the minister then have to listen to the views of the community? The community might agree that they think it should be, or they might disagree and for very good grounds and reasons. Shouldn't there at some stage be a consultation with the community at that stage?
Well, in thinking of the actual provisions of the existing Town and Country Planning Act, there was not much provisions made for consultations within that Act of 1957. But I know as a principle, and based on several jurisdictions where we look at the participatory planning approach, where we seek to involve stakeholders within the planning process by consulting. What would happen is that when certain development applications come in, I don't want to say certain, but there are some development applications that, based on the nature, the size, the location, where we know that there might be some impact, we generally ask applicants to consult with the stakeholders and to submit that as part of the development application.
But in the past, those consultations normally have taken place as the environmental impact assessment, and that's normally after the project has been passed. I don't recall ever seeing it done before a project would be passed.
All right, so there are different ways of consulting, of stakeholder consultations. The environmental impact assessment is one such, but the environmental impact assessment is a tool that is used, or that is required when there is certain development applications. So not every development application would be subject to an EIA. An EIA is required, where a development is being introduced of a certain scale, magnitude within a certain location, whether it be an area that is very environmentally sensitive, etc. However, for the other development applications that wouldn't require EIA, but we know that it has the possibility of causing some impact, whether positive or negative, I just leave it at impact. The agency as a general principle and based on sustainable development goals as it relates to participatory approaches in planning, We would generally encourage developers who are proposing certain developments from the onset of their proposal to engage with the stakeholders and to consult with the stakeholders and to provide us with, whether it be a community consultation survey or a petition of no objection, etc. And that would form a part of their development application that we would review. And in the event that a development application is refused by, whether it be the agency, the authority, and it goes to the minister, what is provided to the minister would be the whole development application, inclusive of various community consultation, surveys, etc. But with respect to the minister himself having the consultations, that is not a requirement under the Town and Country Planning Act. So he can take a decision without the consultation. But as I say, where there's consultation submitted as part of the development application, it is generally all forwarded to the minister for his consideration as well. From time to time, we would have seen where some ministers would take or would weigh heavily into the concerns of of stakeholders. We can't forget that, the ministers, there is some, well, I don't want to say it in this forum, but, we know some of the underlying, I want to say issues, but we know some of the underpinnings when it comes to certain decisions,
I'm sorry, but can I just ask this quick question? Do you believe that commercial developments in an area, that the community should be made aware of them once they're passed? I mean, not to object to them, but just to know, like in the last couple of years, we've had 3 applications to build gas stations along the boulevard. And it's only by luck that we've heard about it. We petitioned feeling that it was not appropriate. But, all the while developments go up, and anywhere else in the world I've been to, especially in Europe, the community is told that this development is going to take place here. Don't you think that the community should be aware of, not residential, but large commercial developments, that the community should actually be made aware of them before construction starts? Do you think that's a normal request?
Yes, but that is actually a requirement under our legislation, whether it be the planning, building, or environmental. It is normally expected that where persons have been granted planning permission or environmental permission or building permission, that they indicate on the site this permit so that persons are aware. So it is not something that is novel. It is something that is actually a requirement.
But it's not done.
There have been
That's not
several.
done. Put that in the order.
But just to add, I mean, in cases where this is not done, several enforcement actions have been taken against proprietors for not having displayed the relevant permits as required by the various legislations that they have posted on the site, what it is that they are doing. So it usually has the application number, the permit date granted, etc., so that persons who are curious can go up and look and see what is there, and and corroborate with whether it be the local planning authority or NEPA as to the validity of said permit. But also to add, as a feature on our website, we have also sought to include these on our website. So where various applications have been approved, there's a listing on our website that persons can go on and view. There's also a web link to our Amanda system, where if you have the reference number, you can go onto our website and log in and input that reference number, and you can see the decisions that were taken with regards to that particular application. So as I say, it is something that has been, it is a requirement under several legislations that developers or proprietors indicate on site what it is that they have been approved for and what it is that they're doing. because we also rely on, you know, the community and stakeholders as part of our enforcement, or part of our enforcement team, you know, so where, you know, persons see things that are happening contrary to what they believe was approved, you know, that information is relayed, and or enforcement officers are dispatched to do their investigations and assess and report back, you know, and where necessary actions, enforcement actions are to be taken, they are generally taken.
But that's not being implemented here in Jamaica.
I would not say that. I know of several. Our enforcement team, you know, as small as it is, they are, you know, one of the hardest working enforcement teams, you know, in the island. You know,
On my way, on your way
Not in
to
Negril
Sam, you'll see
anyway.
how many, you'll see a number of new constructions being put up. I mean, 3 floors, 2 floors. There's no indication of what they're doing there. People just asking, what are they building over there? What's coming over there? There's no postings like the rest of the world does.
I mean, there might literally be post-its, but generally when we give permit applications as part of their approval, as part of their environmental permit package, there's also a template that is provided. So, you know, I'm almost certain when I pass several sites being constructed on that side of the island, you'd see the big NRCA permit application. So they're usually provided with a template, and they are, I think, you know, what might be the issue as well is that because we do not print them, so we give them the template, and the proprietors are responsible for having the signs printed and laminated and put on the sign. So what the template that we give them is on a letter size, and it indicates to them the relevant information that they should put in, but they are responsible for paying to have it enlarged, and whether it be on a placard, a board, or whether they print it on a larger paper and laminate it, but it should be posted on the site. You know, so driving past, you should be able to see the NRCA or the NEPA permit granted with the application number, the name of the proprietor or the applicant, the date of approval, etc., as reference information. And as I said, then that ties in with our system online, where you can take that reference number, input it online on our website, and you will see relevant information as it relates to that particular application.
Okay, never seen one.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to make the point as well that now is when we have a say in what can happen and in our development area by contributing to the order. That is why we're here, isn't it, Mr. Bailey? Now is the time for us to speak up, to say what we would like, what we don't want, etc., so that may be considered to be put in the order, so that if it is in the order, then no one can you know, it cannot be approved unless it is overridden by, you know, the agencies that can do that and the minister. So that is why these consultations are taking place now, correct?
Yes, correct. You know, so we definitely, you know, as I said, in keeping with the participatory planning approach, you know, it is the intention of, you know, of the agency, you know, and through the development order preparation process, that we, you know, empower and embolden the stakeholders within the order area to become involved in the development planning process for their you know, communities and for their order areas. You know, and you know, even when it comes down to when the order is made provisional before confirmation, you know, we have interested parties. So if you own lands within the order area and Negalpa themselves, they can object to anything within the provisional development order. So there are several opportunities along the process where persons can object to various provisions within the development order, you know, but not a lot of persons are aware of, you know, their rights as it relates to that. And we try to sensitize stakeholders on that and to include them in the process and to embolden and empower them to become familiar and aware of the process and the contribution that they can make.
Yes. Sophie?
Yeah, devil's advocate now. The section of Negril that comes under the new Negril, which is from the border of Hanover to the bridge, the North Negril River Bridge. What is the height and density going to be different from what it is for the Westmoreland section of Negril?
The height.
Yeah, height and density, because I know there's been a push to have a higher height and density on the new Negril section than on the Westmoreland section of
Yeah,
and I'll
okay.
tell you the reason why I asked this question.
Mhm.
Just for argument's sake, you maintain the height that we have here on the Westmoreland side, but you increase the height on the Hanover side. I feel that I don't agree with it, and I'll tell you why, because developers are then going to say it's not fair that one side of Negril has a better height limit than the other side. So I don't think it's a good idea. And that's why I'm stating it. But I would be interested to know what has been proposed so far. I don't know if agreements have been made yet, but I'm interested.
Yes, yes. So as I said, no agreement have been made. As I said, the master plan is still with executive and senior management for review. In terms of the height, I don't think I'll be able to divulge of any specific height proposal. But I know in the master plan what the proposals would have looked at. It would have looked at, after excluding several areas that we wouldn't want to develop, to include our coastal wetland areas, sensitive wetland areas, sensitive agricultural lands, etc. And based on the land use zoning as was contained in the existing development order, as well as updated zoning proposals that was done through the process of preparing the master plan, we would have looked at areas, and we should also remember that the purpose of the master plan was specifically to look at increasing building heights and densities for specifically resort developments. Because I think at the time the cabinet was exploring other tourist markets that they wanted to compete with, and what they had found in their preliminary assessment was that in some of these tourist markets, there were significantly higher buildings, and in order for them to position Jamaica to put Jamaica in a position to compete with them, they wanted to explore the idea of having higher buildings and higher densities within the area. One of the reasons why they would have looked at the area that they designated as New Negril was because when they looked at the section existing in Westmoreland, the area, some of the areas were already built out, so they wanted to look at a greenfield site, and to see how, along that greenfield site, how height and densities could be increased within that area. But I know throughout the consultative process for the preparation of that master plan, it would have came up, where persons would have indicated, a somewhat unfair advantage if, one part of Negril would have been given, higher building heights and densities, to the detriment of, another side of Negril that wouldn't be able to enjoy a similar thing. And this was one of the reasons why, the height and density study that is being prepared under the IWECA project is important, because that project will also look at within the existing, Negril area. And when I say existing Negril, Negril proper, and the section of Negril in Westmoreland, that study would look at, given the limitations and the restrictions with the morass, and going to the western area, which is pretty much, rock cliffs, looking at areas that could accommodate, a similar higher buildings and densities would have been explored, and this is where, as I said, being the authors of the Negril Master Plan, as well as this revised Negril Development Order, and taking into consideration the recommendations that will be forthcoming from the Negril Height and Density Study, we will look at all the information, and we will come to, a conclusion that that promotes the sustainable development of Negril and the protection of all its environmental resources. And as I say, going back to the 4 pillars of sustainable development, looking at the economic, the physical, the environment, as well as the social. So where things would have to be reconciled, they will be reconciled to ensure fairness and equity across the development order area, and and again, not separating the area, as old Negril, new Negril, but as Negril and Green Island, and that the parameters are suitable for all involved in development within the order area. If that answers your question or your concern.
Thank you. Yes, we'll hopefully we'll get to see the drafts so that we can really see what is being proposed, and then we can have a better understanding. Because we talk about it, but when we actually see it physically on paper, then we will have a better understanding what is being proposed. So that's why it's important that we do see the draft before it's finalized.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Sophie. There are no more hands up. I'm presuming there are no more questions for the NEPA team. Mr. Bailey, so having gone through all this